being here in this space and allowing me to share a little bit of my story. Thank you, Mateo, for that introduction, and thank you everyone for inviting me over here. So I am currently in Los Angeles, living with my Latinx boyfriend, who's a native Californian, native Angelino. And I moved here in 2012. Before that, I'm actually a third generation Chinese who was born and raised in Manila. When I leave the Philippines, I identify as Filipino because I always don't want to add that additional layer of complexity that I embrace and that I want to share whenever I leave, and because I never really lived in China, so I always really just identify as Filipino, similar to how an American would when they leave the country would not identify as like Texan or California or New Yorker, right? You would identify as an American when you leave the country. But I am Filipino Chinese. I grew up speaking 3 languages, English, Tagalog, and 4 languages, English, Tagalog, Hokkien, which is a dialect. I don't know if it's a dialect or a language, and I'm not quite clear with the difference between the two, but it is from southern China, from the Fujian region, which is where my grandparents are from. Now, my grandparents also speak Cantonese because we have family in Hong Kong, and they actually flew, like my paternal grandparents flew to Hong Kong to give birth to their kids. So my last name, Choi, is Cantonese meaning, Cantonese pronunciation of the Chinese surname Cai. And in Hokkien, it is Chua. So lots of things there. My Chinese, although a lot of people think it's Korean. And then, of course, the 4th one is Mandarin. I'm not going to claim to be fluent in Mandarin. It's one of those things that I learned in school, in a Chinese school in the Philippines. So we did have to learn that. But as with any kid in my generation, when we get out of school, or when we are out of class, we speak to our friends in Tagalog and English, to the disappointment of my grandparents and sometimes my parents. I still speak to my grandparents, and I don't really use Mandarin a lot anymore, outside of music or outside of singing. Only really when I need to, when I'm speaking to someone who, speaks Mandarin who doesn't speak English, and I really need to communicate, then I attempt to dig back in what I learned when I was, I stopped studying Mandarin when I was 16, so that's about like 15 years ago. God. Then I moved to the US in 2012. I was about 23 then. I moved to Boston to study music at Berkeley. I know that some of you are from Cambridge. That's actually when I first got introduced to Unitarian Universalism, was in Boston. I became a staff singer at First Church Boston in Back Bay. It's a very, very white church. And it was not clear to me it wasn't clear to me what UU stood for until I moved to California and started working in UU churches here, because I feel like I felt like I was just there to sing, and I didn't feel the sense of community as a singer. But also the environment was hyper intellectual. There were lots of Harvard divinity, biology folks who intern, and so that's sort of the type of space that they created. I don't know what it is like there now, and some of you can chime in later. I left Boston in 2014, moved to LA to pursue my master's in composition at USC. What I enjoyed about my time in Boston is that the fact that around 60 or 70% of the Berklee College of Music are international students. So um, we shared a lot of things. At the top of the list is our status as F1 students. If you've been here as an F1 student, you would know that you cannot work or have employment outside of school. And, musicians, we gig. We do a lot of gigs. We get hired to sing in places. We get hired to compose. Gigging is our way of life, and it is our way of furthering our years. We can't just be in school. We have to go out and play for people and connect and perform and write and do all those stuff. And being an F1 student at Berklee that time, F1 is the visa categorization for international students. I think at that time that I went to Berklee, they had gone through a USCIS sweep where a few students, international students, were caught playing. They were part of a band who got hired by a bar to gig, and they got caught and they got deported because it's illegal, to which I think is so stupid. But we were not allowed to work. We weren't allowed to get paid. So when I worked at First Church Boston, actually had to apply for what we call what is called a CPT, or a curricular practical training, which you have to. Well, in Berklee, you don't have to pay for it. You can only do it once. You can only do it for one semester, and you don't have to pay for it. It differs from school to school. At USC, it's actually credited. It's a credited course. So if you don't have a scholarship, you do have to pay to get paid, essentially. So that's one of that I wanted to share in this talk is my journey as an immigrant, which I am deep in still right now. But through different colleagues from Berklee, I learned what different visa categorizations are. I learned what O1 is, which is what most musicians have. Eventually go to an EB1 category, which essentially grants us a green card. An O1 artist visa is the longest that it can run is 3 years. And so when I was a student, one of the things that I was warned to do by Filipinos and other international students at Berklee who have been there longer than I have is to save all the programs that have my name on it, either as a composer or as a performer. I still have some of those. I've scanned most of them because I eventually had to submit all that paperwork to USCIS to prove that I am a composer or I'm a musician of worth, essentially. I moved to LA, and after I finished my master's degree, I had 1 year of OPT, which is optional practical training, I think is what it's called, which is a program by USCIS to extend our student visas for a year so that we can work. And at that time, I applied for my first O1 visa, and that was Trump's first year in office, so 2017. It was very difficult. There were lots of things that I had to prove. I had to prove that I had to prove that I had membership in associations that demand outstanding achievement. I had to have, material published about me. I had to have my work displayed in artistic exhibitions or have my work played in concerts. I have to have something published, Thankfully, by that time, I had one work published and I won a couple of awards as a student. I have to demonstrate commercial success. And apart from that, in order to qualify for one visa, you have to have an itinerary. So in order for them to grant you 3 years of visa work, you have to have an itinerary with 3 years of work. And as a musician, who knows? Who knows what I'll be doing in 3 years, right? What kind of gigs will I be hired to do 3 years from now? I wouldn't know that. There are ways around it. There are ways to get people. Gladly, there are a lot of allies, a lot of colleagues who are very supportive and who believe in guided documentation that I will be hired. This comes in forms of contracts and countless work agreements, recommendation letters from Tony winners and Grammy winners, and somehow this is not enough. Somehow, even if we submitted all of that evidence, they still issue what we call an RFE, which is a request for evidence. Either one, if you applied for the premium processing, which costs $1,400, by the way, if you applied for premium processing, they have to get back to you in 15 days. And because ICE receives 3 times the amount of funding that USCIS has, they are way, way, way behind in processing green cards and work visas. So what do they come up with bullshit excuses to extend or to buy time to really review your case. This is agreed upon by a lot of immigration lawyers that I've talked to, a lot of friends who are applying for O1 visas that I've talked to. In fact, I'm in the middle of an RFE right now because 2020, apart from the pandemic and the re-election stress, I actually expired last July. And so I had to apply for a renewal, which we did last March. So I'm okay. I have status here. They give you a 240-day extension when you apply for a renewal before your expiry. But it took them like 2 months to get back to us with an RFE, which we just do. It is exhausting being an immigrant here, having to, and I did it the legal way, by the way. That's the thing. That's a narrative, right? That they all say like, oh, we're not against immigrants as long as they come here legally, as long as they're not illegal. But at the time, they don't know how difficult that process is. And RFEs right now, I hear, are mandatory for US agents to give. They have a quota under the Trump administration of how many RFEs they have to give. So sometimes you don't even need additional evidence. They just request for it because they have to hit a certain goal. So it's expensive. Lawyer fees can range from $5,000 to $10,000. Submission fees, they raise it recently, but a judge blocked it. But like expedited processing is $1,400. The application itself is $700. Not a lot of people have that kind of money to spend. I've been saving up throughout my years here working. I've been saving up knowing that I have to do it again in 3 years. But not everyone is. I guess I consider myself lucky that I have those resources, that I have continuous work as a musician. But not a lot of people are like that. I'm also glad that, gay marriage is a thing. That's something, honestly, that I have talked to my lawyer about in case, we get denied, which is a possibility because they are unreasonable sometimes. But right now, even that is being threatened, gay marriage in this country threatened. And I have some Filipino friends who got their status by marrying a friend. I have some gay Filipino friends who married girlfriends just to get status, and that's what they do. Anyway, that is sort of my story. I don't know how it will pan out yet. I hope it'll pan out for the better. I have been doing everything I can to be a musician of level or certain acclaim, actively getting my works performed by a lot of choirs around the world, and actively composing for orchestras, singing for film scores. I sang in the score that just came out and The Lion King last year. So I'm doing work I'm doing teaching work, and then I also work at UU Santa Monica, where I've been actively pushing for more change in our very white space. In LA, some of the things that I do is I work as a teaching for the Los Angeles Master Chorale, where we have a program in school called the Oratorio Project, where we teach LAUSD. We basically partner up with an LAUSD school, and we compose oratorios, large-scale 9-movement oratorios with high school students. And for the past 3 years, our topics have been very social justice oriented. So my first time there, we did a whole oratorio on the 1968 East LA walkouts, which is very instrumental for Southern California folks to have educational access. Last year, we did an for the Earth, where we talked about climate change. This year, we are doing a topic on the first face of America, which is this little girl. She was named Naya. She was found in the cenotes at the Yucatan region in Mexico. She traveled the Bering Land Bridge from Asia, crossed Alaska, went all the way down. She was found recently, and so we're creating a full oratorio on that. I also sing with a choir called Tonality, which focuses on social justice works. And I try in my personal composition work, I try to tell stories of immigration or LGBTQ experiences. The piece that you heard of mine earlier, Invitation to Love, Paul Laurence Dunbar poem, one of the underrated poets in the late 19th century, early 20th century. I'm proud to say that all of my staff singers at UU Santa Monica are BIPOC folk. Some of you might know Javon Skin. She sings alto for us. And Chloe Vaught is the soprano, lovely soprano. The other soprano is a guest musician for us today in our service today. Her name is Kelsey Han. She's part Korean. Michael Miersma, our bass, is also a quarter Korean, actually. And these are really some of the best singers in LA. A lot of them sing in film scores as well, like me. So we have a happy little crew at UU Santa Monica. Yeah, another piece of mine, I guess, it's called American Breakfast. I wrote it in, I suppose it was 2016. American Breakfast was written after the Orlando Pulse shooting, where a mass shooting just happens every day, that it's starting to feel like an American breakfast. And that's why the piece is called American Breakfast. One of my initial pieces on immigration is a setting of the New Colossus by Emma Lazarus, the one that's in Statue of Liberty, which is actually on a Grammy ballot right now. So we'll see where that goes. Yeah, I guess that is my story. I'm just gonna go through these lists. A spiritual practice for me, it's always, all the time, singing and making improvisatory or otherwise. I love singing. I know not a lot of choir directors like to sing, but I actually do love singing a lot. I grew up as a singer. I consider singing to be my primary instrument. I also love cooking, and I like trying different types of foods. Foods from around the world, in fact. As a young kid, I worked in the food business as food importers. And so they and my brother to various food shows around the world to just try to, because with the expectation that we will take over the family business. But I mean, that did not happen for me, but it happened for my brother. So I became the artist in the family. But I like food. Last week we just had Southern Thai style fried chicken. Have one in Sherman Oaks. It was so good. Yeah, and cooking also. BIPOC experience as a UU professional. I think I've sort of talked about that a little bit. Sometimes feels like I have to push towards the edge a little bit.
Saunder, so let me ask you this. This is AJ.
Yes.
How do you feel that? I mean, this is one of those questions you can't answer, right? So, how would you feel if you were not gay in this world, right? You can't answer that question. But how do you feel that your immigration status or that has influenced your desire for more controversial or whatever you're saying, more provocative kind of music and worship? Is that helpful, or is that just uncomfortable pressure?
I don't think it's pressure. I actually like to do it. I program. I want to showcase music that engages people in conversation and not just, not just pretty music. I want music that will make people think, um, and that share stories that we don't hear often. Whenever we think of choir, we think of like pretty sounds, right? We think of pretty sounds, we think of blend, we think of people singing about hope and love, and all these idealistic things, but there are so many other stories that can be used with medium. Um, for example, one of the big conversations in the choral world right now is programming non-idiomatic music by Black composers, which whenever choir directors think of Black composers, all they think of is spirituals and gospel. But the reality is there are Black composers out there who compose these um, more classical style music, and they want to be recognized as well. When I first got published here in the US, um, it was a choral work, it was an arrangement of a Filipino folk song, Leron Leron Sinta. And for the longest time, that was the piece that they knew me by. They knew me as a Filipino composer, and therefore they have to program a folk song. But the reality is, I write all sorts of other things too. And I want those things to be recognized. And so maybe that's the reason why I started, focusing my output, my artistic output, composition wise, to a more, social justicey type space, which we don't often hear in the choral space because we set poetry old old dead white people, and we don't really tell the story of today in the choir art form. I'm not saying that all music does this, but choirs particularly love to sing stuff like that. I think when I was in Boston, it seemed like a very intellectual space. I mean, really, the whole city is. Everyone's always talking about philosophies and how they relate to like normal everyday life. And sometimes I would understand it, I won't, because I did not grow up in the American full and elementary educational system, So we studied different things. Um, right now, maybe my view of UU is a little bit more of inclusivity and a little bit more maybe humanist, really focusing on the issues of the rather than the philosophies that are discussed in books, that are written by dead people, that are discussed in books, if that makes sense. Um, that's how my relationship is now with Unitarian Universalism. Here are some of my um, resources on music programming. So if you're a conductor, if you're a musician, you probably are used to octavos, printed octavos, which you get from J.W. Pepper or um, Hal Leonard, or what are these other traditional publishers that print their pieces still? Santa Barbara Music Publishing. So a lot of these publishing houses, they're really concerned of profit. So they tend to, because choirs tend to program what they know and what they systemically know and what has system been is what systemically is the favorable sound, sort of that Morton Lawrence and Eric Whitaker sound. in choirs. They sort of look for that, and most of the people who write in that style are white composers because of that lineage. The online music marketplace is a model that has recently, maybe like the past 6, 7 years, recently been introduced, which is an online only music resource where composers are invited to sell their material. Music, royalties in these traditional publishers, printed publishers, you only get 10% as a composer compared to the online music marketplace where you have control in the notation and the look of your score most of the time. Also get 60 to 70% in royalties. Much more valuable if you really want to support your BIPOC composers, then look for the BIPOC composers in these um, models. So Music Spoke is one of the biggest ones. Music Publishing does sort of a hybrid. They do for the print model too, and they do the online marketplace model as well. It's owned by Sia, who's a person of color. He is Persian, of Persian descent. He's also Muslim. Music C is one that was developed last year, focusing on Southeast Asian choral music. So if you specifically want to look outside your sphere of choral works, this is based in Singapore. It's mostly Southeast Asian composers from Indonesia, Malaysia, Taiwan, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, I think also has one, Singapore, of course. These are some of your traditional publishers that I suggest to look outside to. Earth Songs focuses on a lot of choral musics from around the world. Earth Songs is actually my first publisher. They published a Philippine folk song, an arrangement of a Philippine folk song, but they also have with other things, musics from around the world. Um, Pana Musica, Japan, and Taiwan also, a traditional publisher with an Asian music focus. They also sell, of course, choral masterworks from the West. Because they're based in Japan and Taiwan, they have a lot of Asian composers as well. The last one is Ediciones GCC, uh, which is based in Argentina. So they do a lot of Latin American composers. Um, sorry, South American composers. Some diversity, some DEI resources. Institute of Composer Diversity has a works database. They recently paused their composer base, but they because they are asking each composer on that database for permission to have their name listed, which is something that they didn't do when it started very small. This one, it started as like a site where if you're a BIPOC composer, you're invited, or if you're non-binary or a female composer, not only for BIPOC but for essentially if you're anything other than white and male, you're invited to collaborate in the Institute for Composer Diversity. But their composer database, if you're looking for composers, has really, really great filters. They filter by ethnicity, they filter by uh, sexual orientation. They even filter by living or dead. They filter by the bulk of work that you do. For example, if the bulk of your work is orchestral, then you can filter orchestral. Bulk of your work is choral music, then you can filter that too. Marcus Garrett is a composer that you all should check out if you're considering programming. He's also an educator, compiled this lovely Google Doc spreadsheet of non-idiomatic choral music by Black composers, where I discovered a Renaissance composer, Vicente Lusitano. He's Portuguese, he's Black. He sounds exactly like William Byrd and Thomas Tallis. If you want to program those types of works, if you're looking for that sound, but you want someone who's Black, I've never heard of Vicente Lusitano before this spreadsheet. Music by Black composers, also music of Asian American Research Center. Another composer who doesn't compose in the idiomatic way that you should check out, who writes a lot of choral music too, is Michael Abels, who is also a very famous film scorer. He did the score for Us and for Get Out. Really great human being and really lovely, lovely composer. I also like to program music or to learn about different pieces by watching other choirs. These are some of the world choirs that you should listen to because they program a lot of, either they program a lot of new music or they have in-house composers who compose a lot of music that are in their language, or both, or they do both. So Philippine Madrigal Singers, of course, SYC stood for Singapore Youth Choir, but they changed their name to SYC Ensemble Singers. The Madrigal Singers and the Archipelago Singers are both from Indonesia. Coro Entre Voces is Cuba, excellent, one of the best choirs in the world. Soweto Gospel Choir and Stellenbosch University Choir are both from South Africa. Coro Mendoza is from Argentina. Hail Mary, the Queen Children's Choir, they both and the pianist, who's husband of the conductor, do a lot of liturgical Filipino music, sometimes in Latin, sometimes in English, sometimes in Tagalog. So excellent resource too. Crystal Children's Choir, they're based in the Bay Area, but their focus is very Chinese music.